Welcome to Red Inca with Jared Kibber. This episode, we are going to talk about a bilateral game that normally wouldn't be that important, but in this particular case was very important when the India women tied and then won against the Australian women. Myself and Abara talked about this the other day, but to be fair, we didn't see that much of the actual cricket ourselves because we weren't paid to cover it and we were just flicking around. I went to it because it was exciting at the end, let's be honest, which is how I follow most cricket. But here we have Sarah Waris from India on 99.94, who was actually following the entire game. Let's start with this. 47,000 people. I saw something about free tickets. Explain to me how the tickets worked and why they worked and why there were so many people, please.
So the first two, hi Jared, good to be here. So the first two matches of the series they were open for all. They were free, provided by the BCCI. Maybe the BCCI was like, if we market the tickets, if we have a price for them, no one is going to come and all that. Maybe they thought that, but actually so many people came, and 47,000 was the official record for the second T20I, which is huge considering it's women's cricket and considering that it was at the DY Patil Stadium. DY Patil Stadium hosts a lot of IPL matches, so it's not, it's not staffed for cricket. It's not staffed for high quality cricket. It's in Mumbai, and there are a lot of good matches which are held at the DY Patil Stadium. So the fact that so many people turned up and went to see the women's T20I willingly speaks a lot. And before the match began a few hours earlier, there was this poster on the gates which said "Stadium full, ticket over." And for a second, I was just like, that can't be happening. That can't be true. So many people just can't be there watching a women's T20. I was actually proven wrong, and there was actually 47,000 people at the stands cheering for the Indian women's team, and it was. I wish I was there. A lot of my friends were there, but watching from TV, it was just, the overall atmosphere with chants of Vande Mataram, which is the slogan, like loosely translated to "Come on, India" or something of that sort. So it was just, amazing to watch.
I mean, it looked
TV.
absolutely heaving from what I could see. It seemed like a brilliant situation to be watching cricket in. And, the fact that they got so many people was just outstanding. Now, I'm going to ask you for your historical take on this. I know there is a game, which is, I always forget the year that this World Cup was played, but there was a late 90s Women's World Cup final played.
97.
97, yep. I knew it's not 96, and I feel like it's not 99 because it's not in the men's years, but it was somewhere around there. Good. I'm close enough. Late 90s, 97. There's a Women's World Cup final played in Eden Gardens where I don't think we have an official crowd, but we have a semi-official crowd of anywhere between like 20,000 people and 90,000 people, depending on who you talk to. Let's put that aside because I don't think that was brilliantly counted. What are some of the other more official highest crowds numbers that we've ever had for women's cricket in India?
Before we get into that, the 1997 World Cup final, which you said at Eden Gardens, that was a very historical match. You can say India didn't play the final, but that was a historical match for India because that was the match where Jhulan Goswami was, one of the ball girls at the boundary ropes. And, she saw the match and she was like, wow, I want to be there. I want to play the World Cup final. And that was, she is from Bengal, not from Calcutta, but from Bengal. And that was the match which, she was inspired and she's like, I want to play cricket. So historical for Indian cricket that way also. And far as official records, ESPN Cricket Info actually says that the unofficial record for that final was 80,000, but we don't have anything like official, so we can't really put a number to it. But this was the highest. This was the highest for a women's match official records. The previous best was 20,000, which was the first T20I. Before that was somewhere around 15,000, which was in 2018. There was a match at Vadodara, I think, between India and South Africa, if I'm not wrong. So that was the previous best. Those tickets were priced. It wasn't free entry like these ones. So 18,000 then was, a huge number. So it was 15,000, I think. Yeah, 15,000 was a huge number. But 47,000 is just stunning. And there's these, there was a lot of talk about, should the BCCI have priced the tickets? They could have earned revenue from that. Possibly the BCCI was like, we are not going to earn anything from it or something. And for the last three T20Is, actually, the prices, like the tickets are priced. So, the BCCI is like, okay, wow, this went beyond what we expected. And now the tickets are priced for the last three T20Is. Nominal fees, but yeah, so
I mean, I've
maybe
long
that's,
thought
yeah.
that there's a lot of cricket played around the world where the best ticket price would be free because you don't make a huge amount. Like you go to county cricket and you get these crowds of like 1 to 2,000 people paying 15 and 20 quid. And you're just like, what number would we get if it was free and you could come and go at any stage? I've often thought that around the world, and maybe it wouldn't work, but it's a really interesting social experiment. Let's talk about that particular game. So Australia make 187 for one. I would say if in a T20 game you only lose one wicket, you've probably not gone quite as hard as you should have. But that's a pretty big total, looking at going up against the Australian bowlers, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And especially for India, that kind of target 188, they are not really the best chasing team. They often, it's almost the openers. If they do well, then they do well. And because they don't have a very strong, they've not had a very strong middle order. So the target of 188 was always going to be tough for them. And that's how, I was also expecting it to go the similar route where India takes it close and then they just stumble because of the lack of a good middle order, which changed. And I think was the positive for me from that match.
They got a bit behind in that chase as well, lost some wickets. Mandana was incredible. She made 70 odd in that innings, smashing everything through the offside from the highlights that I saw. They end up needing 14 runs from the last over, but it's against Megan Shute, who I haven't got the stat in front of me, but I'm going to say off the top of my head that her economy rate in T20 internationals is something like 6.26. Right, she's not unhittable, but fairly unhittable when it comes to T20 cricket. 14 runs in that last over when you don't have your top order batting is quite tough no matter what, right?
Yeah, definitely. It's tough. And especially the fact that it was Richa Ghosh out there. She is a teenager. She is. She is playing the under 19 World Cup, which has got a lot of criticism in its own way. That, if someone of that level who's played international cricket should go out and play under 19 cricket, and Shafali Verma is in the team also. So it's like, India is there to bully the other teams. So it was going to be tough. And then actually, Dipti Sharma was on strike for the last over. Richa Ghosh ran a single and Dipti Sharma was on strike for the last over, which was everyone's like, that is the game awareness which India still needs to develop, because it went India's way. Devika Vaidya came in and hit a four of the last ball to level the score and all, but it could have well gone south just because of the lack of game awareness, because Richa Ghosh was batting so well. She was ended with 26 of 13, but they ran a single of the second last ball, and then Dipti Sharma, who wasn't really, who was new at the crease and is not the power hitter that you want her to be. So it panned out well, beautifully for India, and 47,000 people got their money's worth, but it's still, these small things which needs a little bit of improvement.
Well, also, just the middle order. I was a while back now, but I'm sure these stats still hold up. You were talking about how the Indian top order basically makes all the runs and the Indian middle order makes none. So chasing this total against Australia with your middle order, especially with, a teenager out in the middle who did some of the damage, there's some very good signs from Indian women's cricket. And for you and I who've seen enough of them play, at sometimes, It felt for a little while like they were essentially getting their wicketkeeper to get concussed on purpose so that they could replace her so they had more batting. I'm not
Yeah.
saying they actually did that, but it did happen in a couple of games. But it did get to the point where you were thinking it's not the worst tactic in the world because they can't actually find enough players in the middle order. I thought this was a really interesting team, a really interesting chase because of that fact.
Yeah, and Richa Ghosh. So the middle, it was always Mandana, Verma, Gemma Rodriguez, who's not been in the best of forms for a long time, and then Harmanpreet Kaur, and then the middle order was just made up of bowlers who could bat a bit, batters who could bowl a bit. It was, you can say bits and pieces, middle order, or whatever word you can use for that. And the presence of Richa Ghosh, she bats at number five. In the second T20I, she was at number five, but she can bat anywhere down the lower middle order. She's batted at seven also, I think, if I'm not wrong. So. That just adds firepower to the team, which is something which they have lacked. It's uh, Harmanpreet Kaur has her off days. She's blown hot and cold of late. And someone like Richa Ghosh, she's so fearless. Even today, like during the third T20I, the stumps mic caught her saying, uh, let's not be afraid, girls. We are ready. So it's just, she was saying that this in Hindi, but just the fact that, even if it's Australia, whatever it is, we are ready. We are there to give it back to them. Let's not be afraid. So for someone who is 19 years old to have that, sense of temperament and just fearlessness in her game, which is something which India needed. And the second T20I was just how it's the small missing components which, if fitted together, can make this Indian team so powerful. In the third T20I, the middle order did fail and the same issues came to haunt them. But, it's just about consistency. They've got a new coach now, batting coach. So, exciting times ahead, I would say that.
So in that game, they got a boundary off the last ball. That tied it up. We went to the super over. India come out. They smashed 20 runs in the super over. Australia made 16, but they hit a 6 off the last ball. So they were out of the super over a little bit earlier. It was just a good game of T20 cricket. Exciting game. Anything that goes to the super over. What was really interesting then is we talked about the crowd at the ground. And certainly that crowd went popping. And got very excited and became a big part of it. But I think the more pressing thing for me is the social media side of things. This is a game that really got picked up on social media and that most importantly, casual Indian cricket fans watched. So I don't know how many hardcore Indian cricket fans there are if you count the men's team, but this went beyond that bubble of just people who are, completely in. I don't know if it was your tweet or someone else, but it went beyond 10 million views on Hotstar. That is, once you get over that sort of number, that we're starting to get to the sort of area where the men's team get to at that point. Now, it's not quite at the same level. They can get up to... Well, they can get up to, if it's India, Pakistan, well beyond. But for a normal bilateral game like this, if the Indian men get 28, 30 million on Hotstar, they're looking pretty good. But for a standard game, you're probably looking at more, 15 to 20 million. So over 10 million for the women. And that's not free. And that was all because it was a close game and because the Indian women came up. That's massive.
Yeah, definitely. And that's not counting, people who are watching on television. That's just people who have subscribed to Hotstar. So I was watching on television, but I had the Hotstar subscription on, so I could, see the numbers.
So you doubled the numbers. So we can't count this. There's all these people out here with two screens.
Yeah, because the television is, a few deliveries, a few seconds faster. Not a few deliveries, a few seconds faster. So it helps when I'm working.
Nothing annoys me more that when I have to when I have to work in cricket, but I'm having to do it on an iPad or a phone, and you can't follow Twitter at the same time, or you can't follow Cricinfo or CricBuzz because they're ahead of you. Sorry, that's a completely different rant, but it is so annoying that so many of these streaming platforms, and sometimes it can be like 4 deliveries.
Yeah.
Like what?
Yeah.
I didn't want to live 4 deliveries in the past. Who do you think I am? Continue.
I think it was the same match where initially I was watching. I didn't really expect it to go become as exciting as it did eventually, and I was watching on my laptop because I had work and it helps in taking screenshots, etc. So I was watching on my laptop, with a mini tab, and I was working. Obviously, it was a few deliveries late, and the super over, like in the last over, people were like, "Oh my god, there's a 4 now," and I'm like, "Don't give spoilers, don't give spoilers." So that was irritating, and then I eventually went and saw it on the television. So yeah, these numbers, it doesn't count the TV numbers, and by the end it was around 11 lakhs. I don't know how that translates into millions, but it was 11 lakhs. And just a number which is at the top of my mind was, when Rishabh Pant was batting against Sri Lanka this year, early in the year, and he got 100, the people watching then was 7 lakhs on
Wow.
Hotstar. So I this is no, like, I'm not comparing, I'm not saying that people should watch women's cricket more, they shouldn't watch men's cricket or whatever. This is no way of comparison, but I'm just saying that this number is huge because there is this whole talk, even within the BCCI circles, even within the journalists that who are close and privy to the happenings in the BCCI. They are constantly like, the women's IPL is getting delayed because the BCCI fears they won't get in audiences. The BCCI is delaying the women's IPL because they're scared, not scared, or whatever word you can use. They don't think that people will be interested, or no one is going to watch the TV revenues, like there won't be money coming in, or all these excuses, all these ready excuses kept coming up when you kept on talking about, women's IPL and the development of women's cricket. So, and this match, it was just one of match. They went on to lose the 30-20. But it just proved that, if marketed well, if the pitch is well. Another reason, the pitch was brilliant in that game. Actually, the first two games the pitch was brilliant, so there are a lot of talks about, shortening the uh, pitch and, making the boundary smaller, because the women's cricket, it's boring, it doesn't have a lot of power, and it's like a snooze fest, whatever. But the importance of a good pitch and all these reasons is just like no reason for the BCCI. It was a slap for the BCCI, I would say. Like, so that was the overall impact for me, that, the BCCI was just shut up once and for all. And hopefully the women's IPL is now a greater success.
Yeah, I should say, when I was talking about those numbers before, I was talking about more the TV numbers. The Hotstar numbers on their own are just absolutely phenomenal. And I
Yeah.
didn't realize when you were tweeting, you're just talking about the streaming numbers, which is
Yeah.
absolutely off the charts. So here's the thing I'm interested about. This is a bilateral. They're giving tickets away, so the BCCI who are running this tournament don't particularly think it's going to be massive.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I was running Indian cricket outside of premium tickets, I'm not sure I'd ever sell tickets. I probably would only ever give tickets away because you make so little off the ticket sales anyway. You could almost have, or the rest of the world will have empty grounds, and Indian cricket could have full grounds everywhere. But that's a slightly separate way of looking at things. It's a bilateral game. I know it was on a weekend. It wasn't particularly, it wasn't hugely marketed coming in, as in, they were playing Australia, but it wasn't like everyone was banging it up. It's a huge deal for a game like this to pop the way that it has, being that it is a bilateral game. Was in the middle of a series. India had lost the first game, hadn't they? Yeah, they'd lost the first game. Yeah.
Yep.
So it's not like India were coming off a great win. It just feels like this is another huge moment for women's cricket around the world, that a bilateral game, I know it's India involved and India changes everything, but that a bilateral game can pop to such a level that suddenly it becomes, it was basically a water cooler game, right? If the next day you were going to be talking about that game, that feels like another level unlocked for women's cricket. It's easy to do that in a World Cup, but to do it outside of a World Cup seems like something else.
Yeah, and I was just looking at few numbers. There were 24,000 people approximately during the World Cup final at Lords in 2017. Obviously, 86,000, the huge number at MCG. And we spoke about the huge turnout at Eden Gardens in 1997 as well. But again, yeah, these were all world events, and there's something larger at stake. This is just a, you can say, a meaningless T20I, and plus it's against Australia. It's not even against a team where you are guaranteed a win. So it's Australia, and though India have had a history of running Australia very close, their last three World Cup defeats, Australia's, have come at the hands of India in 2017, 2018, and then in 2020 World Cup, T20 World Cup. Then they ran Australia close in the Commonwealth Games, the league game, and then even the final. They could have won the final if not for the whole middle order mess as well. So I think people who follow women's cricket would have known that, okay, this is a team that has a lot of potential. They keep falling at the final hurdle. But then you never know that, this kind of support, what this kind of support does to these players. And even Smriti Mandana, who's played all across the world, she was talking about, how this kind of support just cheers the team on and then makes them want to do bigger things. So overall, for a bilateral, these were unheard of numbers, and even the BCCI would have been shocked, just for the fact that for the last three T20Is they have started pricing the tickets. So which just shows that, okay, wow, this has gone beyond what we expected. And also huge kudos to the people who actually turned up, because I am very impressed and happy that the BCCI is, has had to take cover uh, once and for all, hopefully. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. What we are going to do now is I asked you to come up with a list of your five most monumental. How did I phrase it to you? The most important games in modern women's cricket history. We say modern women's cricket history just because we're not hypercoursed. John Leather, if you've never followed women's cricket, hypercoursed on Twitter or Mastodon now. He was banned from Twitter recently, but he's back. He's probably the best, especially from the historic side of the game, of following it around the world. He's absolutely brilliant. Neither of us are pretending to be him. And, he'll suddenly be talking about it, Jamaica versus, New Zealand one dayer from, 1978 or something. But women's cricket has obviously changed a lot. So in the last, 5 to 10 years, we're looking at the most important games in women's cricket. Give me your number one.
I would still say it's the 2017 World Cup final.
Ooh, that's not my number one. I've got
Yeah.
that way lower down the order.
I would call that my number one because of, the not only for the match, obviously, not the final, but, the semis and the final knockouts combined, you can say, because of the overall impact it had in just changing the attitude towards women's cricket. Maybe because India was there and they lost by 9 runs, they lost the semi final by 9 runs. It was a close defeat, and it was just very heartbreaking loss. Maybe if it had been 150 run loss, no one would have really cared. But that coming after Harmanpreet Kaur's fantastic innings, and just one more before we get to it, that was the first article which I read of yours. That was the Harmanpreet Kaur article you wrote. That was the first article I wrote of yours. And now to be speaking about that on your show, it's like, life is amazing.
Yes, you're making me feel very old. So that I have that as number one game, the Harmanpreet game, ahead of the World Cup final, because I don't think you get that World Cup final. Well, I mean, literally, India wouldn't have made the final without Harmanpreet's game. But also, that Harmanpreet game had the exact same curve that game had, that we're talking about, this India-Australia game, in that it didn't start out with anyone thinking it was going to be anything special. And then as she takes off, I remember the ratings go out. There's a really interesting backstory about this, is that is the day that Cricinfo redesigned their site, right? And basically the whole thing crashed because they weren't expecting that many people to turn up for that particular game. and no one could work out where the scorecards were because everything changed, and everyone went ballistic for that particular game. So I still remember, working with Cricinfo and going, I can't believe that they picked World Cup semi-final and then Harmanpreet does this. So I have Harmanpreet at number 1. All right, what have you got at number 2 as your most important game?
Again, I would still have an India match there. Just for the overall, the buzz it created and how the world started talking about it. It was the recent T20 ODI between India and England with Dipti Sharma with her run out.
Interesting.
And that was the match which. So my top 5 games are more about the overall impact
No,
and
but that's
how it called the world.
no, that's what it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
So I didn't have
Yeah.
that on there. I talked about that recently. I think it's a really, really important moment for women's cricket. But I almost detached the run out then from the game a little bit. So number 2 for me, I have West Indies winning in 2016 in the World T20 because it's the first time we really see someone from outside that Australia, England, New Zealand triangle of come along. And also women's cricket hadn't had a lot of massive underdogs, right, that had won. And I don't know, you probably know this, but maybe some of the audience won't, that when they first went to the Olympics and they said we would like cricket to be in the Olympics now, the Olympics said, you've got 4 women's teams who are any good. Why on earth would we let you in? Go and get your women's game better. The ICC did not go and get the women's game better, by the way. Eventually got better on its own. But West Indies winning from a potential of what that could do when they could go back and say, okay, we now have about, what would you say, with Bangladesh and Pakistan and the Thai women, they probably now have 7, 8, 9 teams that are very good. But that West Indies win on its own is worth a lot politically. So I've got that as number 2. All right, what have you got as your number 3?
I was actually there for the final, 2016 final.
Oh,
Both the women's and the men's games.
Yeah,
So,
it was
exciting.
It's such a weird day. Like I remember writing this huge piece about it because it was like this huge celebration of West Indies cricket. And looking back on it, it kind of feels like that might be the last big celebration of West Indies cricket that we've ever had, which is a real shame. What have you got at number 3?
At number 3, I'll have Thailand's win against Pakistan in the Asia Cup this year.
Oh, that's good.
It was.
I feel like I should have had that.
It was, for everything, it's Pakistan. Not as strong as the men's team, but obviously it's Pakistan, and then it's Thailand, so just the overall impact of what it would have done to the women cricketers in Thailand, just overall, it's plus the fact that a player from Thailand played in the women's T20 challenge for the last 2 seasons, so that overall just heightens the growth of cricket in Thailand. That's why it's my number 3.
I like that. The other thing I like about that is, and the whole Thailand story is, that specifically they're not good at men's cricket, right?
Yeah.
And so that's if I was the ICC, I'd be like, that is brilliant. And we know similar things happen in Brazil, and even people are talking about similar things hopefully happening in places like Argentina and other places, where if we can get growth in some of these nations where it's not just men's, that actually opens up things even more. And because the problem is that with associate cricket, you kind of need like this Namibia golden generation to come along for it to be any good. What you really want is for at one stage the men's team to be good and another stage the women's team to be good. Thailand, I'm annoyed. I've gone with something slightly different. It'd be interesting to see if this is on your list. But the India test against England at Wormsley in 2014. Yeah. And I've gone for this for a couple of reasons. One, it was played at Wormsley. And for those who don't know, Wormsley is Jean-Paul Getty's. Is it Jean-Paul Getty? Whichever Getty. There's so many Gettys, right? Mark Getty used to own Cricinfo, by the way. One of the Gettys used to own Cricinfo. But yeah, I think it's Jean-Paul Getty's personal house. And he then put a cricket ground out the back, as rich English people are wont to do. A few Maharajas did it back in the day as well. A couple of Americans have done it of recent times too. But he put this ground out there. It's literally a hobby ground for himself. But when women's cricket was at that middling level, it's like Wormsley kept offering, and it does have it's a brilliant pitch. Oh, sorry, let me tell you, I played a drive on the up against a first-class cricketer on this ground where I could have dropped the bat and walked off. I was so happy. Just like the way the ball came onto the bat, and I was like, this is great. It's maybe my highlight of my career. But it's a beautiful pitch. And so they offered it. But this is why I think it was really big. At that stage, early on, there was a lot of talk about how women shouldn't be playing Test cricket. It wasn't entertaining. By the end of the game, it was one of the most feel-good stories that you will ever see. But also, it sort of, maybe not in the short term, but certainly in the long term, moved women's cricket away from those, what I would say, non-professional grounds. That's a little bit unfair to Wormsley because it's a semi-professional ground. But what I mean is in England, there's about 40 grounds above it in the pecking order. So if you're playing, so now we know that England's home has become Taunton. Also, the fact that the England women had gone professional in 2012, 2013, I think, off the top of my head. So for them to lose to India at that stage, I think was really important. That it was a test match and everything else. I just think it was a really big moment for the continuation of women's cricket, because at that point, it's kind of before T20 had completely taken over. But at that point, we really didn't talk about women's test matches at all.
Yeah. I don't have that on my list. But I have the two. Again, India. You can say I'm favoring India, but then I have the two tests that India played last year on my list. So one was against England and one was against Australia. Both were away. Both ended in a draw. And both were played away from home, and especially the one against Australia. India scored 377 for 8 declared in their first innings last year. Australia scored 241 for 9 declared in their first innings. So, and the match went on and ended in a draw, and Mandana was brilliant again in that match. So it was the talks of, how even the one against England, India came back from nowhere and they just had a very brave partnership and they just hung on for a draw. And there were talks that, this is why women's test cricket needs to be 5 days long, because there were these two draws which played out and they could have had a result if there was an additional days in both games. So, I didn't have the one 2014 in your list. I wasn't really following cricket back then, so I didn't go way back.
All right, we understand you're very young. You don't have to mention it in every answer. Okay.
Yeah.
But have you got those at number 4 and 5, or is that a joint number 4?
I think I've added that as a joint number. Yeah.
So I had at number 4, I had the England winning the World Cup final in 2017. So I had it lower than the Harmanpreet game. I still think it was an important game because I think that what did you say the crowd was for before? Was it 27,000 or
24,000?
24,000. I remember thinking it was a sellout. Like I was there for that particular game, but there was a lot of, what I really liked about that game is there was a lot of hype beforehand. And the ECB did a great job. The ECB basically made every player available beforehand. And I remember Hen, who was running English women's media at that stage, I think she's moved on to another position of recently. But I remember like calling her up and just going, I'd like to talk to all the players. And I must have said that to every media manager in the world before. And it's the first time anyone would said, okay, how much time do you have? And literally, I just had like this rotation. And I remember, I think it was Colo had someone, maybe Vish, and there were all these journalists in the at the wasn't the nursery and WG Grace, whatever it's called, the garden. And literally they were just going through, and like Mark Robertson would come over. Hello, Jared, how are you? And very Mark Robertson. And then Anya would come by and Heather, and it was but the whole thing was there was, I don't know, 40 or 50 media around the day before a game. That is just not something you see. And part of that is obviously that it's a final, but I've covered women's finals before. I covered that 2016 final. I covered the 2012 final. There weren't no one there. No, do you know what I mean? It wasn't like this, right? It was a real different day. I think the game was important. I've just put it down below the others, just because I think that the others might have had different kind of impacts. And I still think the Harmanpreet game was the reason that other game did. All right, what have you got at number 5? And I should say, and I'm asking you first because I have about 7 number 5s.
At number 5, again, I would say the 2020 World Cup final. just for the huge crowd, 86,000. It was the first tournament women's. No, 2018 was the first tournament standalone women's T20 World
But
Cup
this was the first one that
tournament.
felt really standalone, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was, to have 86,000 people at the MCG watching. I don't know what the numbers were for the India Pakistan game this year.
I think
But
it was around the
would
same,
have
wasn't
been,
it?
yeah, it would have been pretty close. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, just the buzz. There was Katy Perry performing, and obviously I wasn't there, but from people who were there, they were like, the whole, it seemed like the whole city was just talking about this final.
Yeah.
And in contrast, if you can compare that to the men's T20 World Cup, there was hardly anyone turned up except for the India Pakistan game and a few other games, and people were like, many didn't even know that such a final, such a tournament was going on. So just the contrast that within a space of 2 years, the women's game attracted such a huge amount of interest, and everyone was talking, and then just 2.5 years later, the men's tournament, the quality of matches were great, but the overall spectator count wasn't the greatest. So just in comparison, that was one more tournament which showed that okay, women's cricket is here and people do want to watch the game. So
Yeah.
that's number 5 for me.
Yeah, it's one of my number 5s. I'll leave it off now that you've put it on. What I found interesting about that was that the ICC went out of their way to promote one game. It's a really risky strategy. Imagine, they did that and they got like 25,000 people there, right? And it didn't work. And this whole thing about Melbourne and loving sport, Melbourne does love sport, but Melbourne also knows when something's not real. Like, Melbourne at one stage had, it's got 45,000 seat arena. At one stage, it had 2 arenas that I think both had over 80,000 people, right? But I've been in those arenas when I've been one of 7 people, right? It's not like everyone turns up for every game. They're there for specific reasons. So it could have gone very poorly. If you look at that, and the way that they promoted that, I don't know if it was the same team or a different environment. And I know they definitely promoted it in a different way. But there is no doubt that they went out of their way to really sell that one game. And they succeeded in it. And then for this last World Cup, they kind of gave away the first week. And Australians really got upset at that. And then from then on in, it never took off in the way that it should have. And in the end, it was the tourists who flew in, whether it be for India or Pakistan or England, that really ended up, and Zimbabwe, who really ended up giving that tournament life. That's a huge error for me. So yeah, I had that on my list. I'm going to throw 2 other games at you. You're talking about the biggest crowds for women's games. I don't know how many people were at this game, but I'm pretty sure that it was a sellout for the first women's 100 game. That was free tickets as well. It was really interesting. So it was at the Oval, and I think there was around 20 to 22,000 off the top of my head. I remember it was absolutely jammed in there. And it was the first time I'd been in a women's game where we were there to see the women's game, where it felt like a party for women's cricket. So 2017 World Cup felt like a World Cup event, and there was a lot of hype around it. But that first 100 game felt like something else. It's the first time I've really been in a crowd of that size where it just felt like people were there because they loved the thing. And which is interesting because it was free, and there would have been a lot of people who probably hadn't been to a game before. And if I was going to tack on another game on the end of this, I think it's probably also worth pointing out the fair break game, the first fair break game, which was telecast around the world, and it didn't get as much attention or as much crowd, obviously, as many of these others. But having that tournament, which is something that men have never really managed, which is that international franchise tournament. On top of that, then making it so it helps associate cricket. And then on top of that, making it good enough that there's going to be at least one more tournament off the back of this as well. For me, seems like a really, really big deal. So I think the women's 100 is more important. And if you're saying, oh, well, the women's Big Bash was around before it, the women's Big Bash was really a throw-in to the men's Big Bash. And I don't know how many people know the full story, but the women's 100 got extra push because the sponsors basically wanted it to have extra push. And in the end, it did end up being sort of a curtain raiser tournament for the men's 100. But that first game was standalone and absolutely rocked. So I thought that was a huge one as well. Is there any others? Have you got any honorable mentions, or have we done every game that we could think of?
The next time we speak, hopefully the women's IPL is on my list.
Women's IPL, yeah, it should definitely be on there. Women's PSL was another one.
Yeah.
I watched some of the women's CPL with my son. Actually, I think I watched some of the women's, what was the other tournament called? The 60 with my son
Yeah.
as well. In fact, I probably said this on the podcast before, but one of my sons did say to me once, Dad, is it okay if we watch the men playing cricket sometime too? And he wasn't saying it like, he was just like, he was more almost asking the question because we'd been watching so much women's cricket of whether there was any men's cricket to watch as well. Sarah, thank you very much for coming on. I do think this is an important game going ahead. Do you think, does this game, I know you talked about embarrassing the BCCI. Do you think this game will be something that we will look back on in, we haven't put it in our lists. I don't even know, it's too recency bias for either of us to put this in our list. But do you think looking back, this might be one of those, and I know we've had a lot in women's cricket, but another sort of leveling up situation?
Yeah, definitely. I would say so, because it doesn't only give the BCCI like open their eyes to the fact that women's cricket in India is something which the consumers want, but it also doesn't let them hide behind any more excuses that no one is interested or there is no talent pool, because this is something which Saurav Ganguly said a few months ago, that there's no talent pool in Indian cricket, so that's why the women's IPL is being delayed, which is bizarre because obviously the performances of the women's team, you can say, is better than the men's team at world events. So all these reasons, the BCCI won't have any other excuses to hide behind. And hopefully, this could be the start of something new. The performances need to keep coming also. We've spoken about that. But whatever performances they are, it's in spite of the BCCI's, terrible attitude towards women's cricket. So just imagine if the attitude is 1% better and there is a serious, eagerness to develop women's cricket, how Indian women's team and women's cricket in general could just improve. So it's something for the BCCI to consider. I don't think they will, because they are just a bunch of old politicians just snacking around, not caring about women's cricket. But I just hope it's the start of something new. And the IPL franchises, hopefully they join women's IPL, because that will, already have the established fans go to the women's IPL teams also. And just imagine if KKR is there, I'm going to have two KKR teams to bash out at and lose my temper at.
Yes,
So,
I can't wait for you to be just as angry about the women's team as you are the men. Just on that talent pool thing, obviously it's nonsense, right? But in a very specific way, it's nonsense. Because when you're saying the talent pool isn't there, what you are actually saying is the BCCI has not developed the talent correctly, right? And so what they should be saying is, now what we're going to do is develop that talent, and here's how we're going to do it. Because otherwise, what he is saying is, for some reason, Indian men are born with more talent for cricket than Indian women, which makes absolutely no sense at all. But thank you very much for coming on the podcast. If for those of you who haven't heard Nikesh and Sarah, go over to India on 99.94, or if you're listening to this on India on 99.94, just come over to my podcast and listen to me, Jared Kimber. All right, we'll see you again next time.